My name's John Howe. I'm a professor of history at Texas Tech University, specializing in things medieval. And I've been asked to introduce a couple of articles on reforging the Age of Iron that were published in History Compass. Now, the Age of Iron means the 10th century. It's a pejorative term Renaissance historians used to describe what they thought was the darkest of the Dark Ages. That is a time period that was distinguished by invasions by Vikings and Muslims and Magyars, by papal assassinations in Rome, by the destruction of monasteries, a time period so bad that it was presumed that people were waiting around for the year 1000 for a millennium that would put them out of their misery. Well, subsequent scholars, especially from the mid-20th century on, have suddenly found the 10th century a lot more interesting. A time when broader Europe, Scandinavia, Iberia, Eastern Europe came together, a time that archaeological evidence reveals is much more interesting than we thought. Now there's interest in the 10th century, but scholars are not agreed about what to do with it. One group of scholars believes that the 10th century represents the end of the ancient world. That is, the post-Roman societies that emerged in the Latin West after 476 continued on in a Roman project of civilizing barbarian tribes, of spreading Latin, of spreading Christianity, creating, by the 10th century, a very Roman world that a feudal revolution would sweep away. Another group of scholars wants to focus not on the 10th century as the end of the ancient world, but as the 10th century as the start of something new, as the birth of the High Middle Ages, distinguished by new villages and cities and trade and urban life, a development of a 10th century Renaissance in culture, a revival of the Latin Church, and the 10th century appears as the start of a new period in Western civilization. Now there's even a third group of scholars who claim that while these harbingers of a new Western civilization are true, they weren't really original to the 10th century, but were developed in the Carolingian world, in the world of the 700s and 800s, and that the 10th century should best be seen as a continuator of an earlier medieval project. Now, all these different models are not that easy for students to understand. And for my own students and from other students, I have put together these History Compass articles to try to convey something about the historiographical field that exists, and also to make it a little less confusing, because in fact, scholars are not that far in disagreement. They all situate the 10th century in relation to the High Middle Ages. They differ about whether it anticipates the revival of the High Middle Ages, whether it's the first stage, or whether it in fact represents earlier birth of Europe, slightly checked by Vikings and other invaders, but in the 10th century back on track. And study of the 10th century illuminates a lot of issues that are key to the development of not only medieval history, but of the story of Western civilization.